what I was seeing, I think that was like the summer that I was like, oh, I'm going to travel the world and be a nomad and blah, blah. And like, that didn't work out. I mean, I left, but then I had to come back. So I think I was seeing in the people that I was talking to, and I was talking to women, and what I was seeing was a lot of issues around how patriarchy was impacting them. And in that, I was also seeing how race was impacting. And I was finding that I was not quite saying all the things that I wanted to say about race, because a lot of the spaces I was in online and a lot of the spaces where I was connecting to people and attracting potential clients were white dominated spaces and a lot of like white women. And I was like, I don't know if this is going to go over well with them. And then I was like, wait a minute, but if I'm not saying what needs to be said, then I'm not serving Black women. I'm not serving Indigenous women. I'm not serving women of color. And I decided, I was like, actually, these are the people I really want to be working with. So I'm going to remove myself from these white spaces, and I'm going to really direct my skills and my services towards, at that time, it was women of color. And then I kind of like went in this sort of like up and down, not roller coaster, because roller coaster sounds bad, but like this kind of zigzag of like, who do I really want to work with? So it was like women of color, and then creatives of color. And then now it's like Black creatives is who I'm working with. Because there are things about our experiences that are largely ignored or dismissed, and often in harmful ways, in the coaching industry. And I'm like, I know that I can be of service to these people in a way that they're not being served by other coaches, like people who don't understand them, and not only don't understand them, but actually benefit or continue to benefit from our oppression. So, you know, like if you're going to look for healing and guidance, like, can you really heal from someone who's continuing to oppress you? No. So
yeah,
that's how I ended up now working with Black creatives. And now I'm making a pivot, not on who, but I am bringing more pleasure and pleasure activism into my work. And
I noticed that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that. I was interviewing another another great friend, right? Like, and that's what she specializes in, is like tapping into your pleasure. I'm like, well, yeah, no, I noticed that. That's really good. And you see, I invited you because, you know, aside from I really like chatting with you, is that so I can see your another perspective on things, because I know that, oh, there's oppression, all right, you know. I know the perspective of being Asian and immigrant and all that stuff. There are certain things that I can't even get myself to say in my marketing. And every time I reach out, you know, I talk to coaches and they're all white. There are certain things that I say and they're like, what? And I'm like, you don't get it, man.
Yeah, they're like, what? Or they're like, oh, well, you're just being negative. You're just playing the victim. You're being very low vibe right now. Shut up. Shut the fuck up. Like, you don't actually understand these experiences.
Yeah. So I still do some affiliate marketing, and there's this one lady, she's very new in the industry and English is not her first language. And she said, well, I'm having a lot of trouble because English is not my first language. And then this white ass coach just goes on and says, well, that's just a limiting belief. I'm like, dude, you don't understand what it's like to translate everything in your head. And, you know, sometimes I start stuttering on coaching calls. Personally, for me, I start stuttering because I'm translating everything in my head and I'm going like 10 miles, 100 miles an hour. And then the other person on the other end is like trying to make fun of it. I'm like, it's not funny, bro.
See, and here's the thing. It's beyond, it goes beyond like, oh, that's just a limiting belief. If it was just that you had to translate in your head, I could almost see how she could get there. But here's the reality. In America, people do not have the same respect for people who do not speak like me, who do not speak like very clear, like no, like, I mean, I guess I have like a Northern accent or whatever, but like non-foreign accented English, like people don't have the same kind of respect. They see, like, Americans tend to see, certain foreigners and not like English as a second language foreigners as being less intelligent or just being dumb. And that's something that you still have to contend with, because that's a barrier that if you're working with people, that you have to overcome is, oh, people are actually going to think less of me. People are going to dismiss me. People are not going to necessarily see like my knowledge. They're not necessarily going to listen to me. That is a systemic issue. And white coaches don't understand that. and they ignore all of those things. It's like, no, these are real barriers that we have to deal with. You don't get to just ignore it. And ignoring it is harmful to the person that you're trying to help.
It's like you're diminishing another person's pain, you know. So what would you say, you know, I want to see the perspective when it comes to Black folks and Black creatives. Did I say that right? Folks, right? Okay, cool. So how would you say generational oppression has, you know, kind of put a gag that they can't say certain things? How was that affected? Because, you know, like, even if it didn't happen, it's there, it's in our culture, it's in our upbringing, that okay, you keep your mouth shut, and then you'll be fine. So how was that, how did that work for Black creatives?
Yeah, so I mean, it's really complex. I would say that it really comes down to survival. So for people who, in particular, so like just getting, because Blackness is everywhere, it's all over the globe, you know, but like say in America or even in like Latin America, those of us who are the descendants of enslaved Africans, part of how our ancestors survived was doing certain things for survival. Sometimes it was playing dumb. Sometimes it was trying to be really smart so that they were seen of value. Sometimes it was trying to, you know, placate the master. Sometimes there are all these different things that they use to survive, to literally make it to the next, like, so that the next generation could exist. And those tactics, those survival tactics got passed down. This is how you survive. Don't argue, don't show up too big, try to play small. And it wasn't about, like, for our ancestors, it wasn't about oppressing us. It was, this is literally how you survive, because if you make too much noise, if you get too much attention, you could literally die. Okay, you can literally die. They will take you out. And so this gets passed down to us in these learned behaviors. And it's there's a term for it. It's I think it's post-traumatic slave syndrome. So it's like PTSD, but it's post-traumatic slave syndrome. So it's the ways that systemically slavery has really been ingrained and has taught us certain patterns of behavior for our survival that we now adopt into our everyday here. So it's ways of like, how you have to be of use. Like, that's a big one for us, is you have to be of use to other people, because that was literally our value. If you were not of use, you were killed. You were not of value. They were gonna dispose of you. Okay, so like that gets passed down where, okay, I have to be of use. And then it can turn into, I have to be of use, and I have to be of use before I'm allowed to rest. I have to be of use before I'm allowed joy. Someone has to tell me that I'm doing good enough before I'm allowed to have these other things that I actually deserve, because I'm a human being, like pleasure and joy and rest. And it's things that get ingrained in us, but it's also fed to us by society, because society also, and especially white people, are taught that they are allowed to use us for, as Catrice M. Jackson says, for pleasure and profit. Black bodies are constantly being used for pleasure and profit. And white people are taught that, oh, I get to, what do you mean? You're supposed to be working for me. I'm the white one. You're the black one. And it's subconscious or it's unconscious. It's not necessarily they're having this conscious thought, but there is this element of like, oh, like, but you're supposed to be of use to me. Like, I get to use you. And not just white people, but it is definitely part of white supremacy. But there are also other non-Black POCs who can kind of respond the same way. And that's how it gets passed down. So when we are here still literally fighting for our survival, like just walking down the street, like don't put your hood up, don't put a bandana over your face. That's a problem. We're in a pandemic. Like, people are walking around with bandanas and are like, well, I don't want to wear a bandana because I don't want to die, but I want to wear a bandana because I don't want to die. You know, like, it's a serious problem. So we still have these things that we are contending with. And it is both in the ways that we have internalized our own oppression and racism and white supremacy, but it is also in the ways that the people around us who are not Black are still living from that perspective on a subconscious level of how they get to treat us. And when it comes down to survival, these are the ways I'm allowed to show up. These are the ways the world's telling me I can show up. And these are the ways that I'm going to try to show up, because it's going to mean that I'm safer. And sometimes that also means changing your voice. So code switching, not speaking African American vernacular English. It might mean trying to assimilate more into whiteness. So we have people, for example, like a lot of people who have wigs or weaves, and I'm not saying everybody or anything like that, but like that is a lot of times is this, I'm trying to approximate this Anglo beauty standard because that means that I'm beautiful, that means that I'm of value. Like there's just so many different ways, but that's one of them, is trying to seek a closer proximity to whiteness is one of the ways, which means that if you're trying to be like this idea of whiteness, or you're trying to hide parts of yourself, you're not really showing up fully. You're not really showing up as you are. You're changing the way you're speaking. You're changing the things you're saying. You're changing the things that you're even like pursuing because you feel like you're not allowed to do those things, or that doing those things is not safe.
Yeah. So, when you create your content, and these are in my case, I've ran into this, or you're just being butthurt, racism doesn't exist anymore, it's 2020. I'm like, oh Jesus Christ, yes it does.
Oh my God, I know.
But I was like, well, tell that to, well, I could go on for why and how it still exists, but how do you rise above this? How do you respond to that?
So this is an interesting part of when I started switching over to, okay, I'm really going to cater to women of color, and that I was like not going to take on any white clients. Part of that tension or resistance was in knowing that the things I was going to say was going to stir up trouble. It was going to ruffle some feathers, that I'm like, this is going to be so exhausting arguing with people all the time. And then I was like, I don't have to fucking argue with anybody. Like, I don't have to answer to white people. I don't have to explain to white people. I don't have to educate white people because they're not my target audience. And so for me, like, I have a rule for myself that like, I don't argue with white people. I don't argue with white people online. If you're in my life and you're white, like I might call you in. If you're a friend, I will extend that to you because you're my friend. I'm willing to do that emotional labor. I'm willing to do that education to a point. But when it comes to people I don't know you. Get off my platform. This isn't even for you. And I will quickly block people. And that is for me. There are people who are willing to educate and do that emotional labor for white people. They should be paid. If someone is doing that for you, you should pay them. I'm not willing to do that. And I had to make that decision for myself because it depletes my energy away from the Black people that I can really be helping. So generally speaking, if it's somebody like online, I'll just be like, no, we're not doing this. I actually have a couple of like white, like online friends that I'll be like, yo, do you want to handle this one? Because I'm not doing it. And like people who have said like, oh, if someone comes on your platform, you come tell me and I will collect my people. So sometimes I will do that. But mostly I've just made an agreement with myself that I don't argue with white strangers. I only extend that to people that I know, and I'll be like, do I want to do this? Because really that's a choice that I have. And here's the other thing is there are, I actually recently posted on my Instagram about like white privilege, and it was like 6 slides explaining white privilege. I'm like, I know this is speaking to white people, like, but I'm actually posting this for the Black people who have to navigate these conversations because it's frustrating and it's exhausting. And here are some points that you can use if you choose to do that. Because like I said about being of use and people always being entitled to our time, there's an element of people expecting you to educate them. People expecting you to go through that labor. And then they get mad when you don't. They're like, well, why don't you help me? It's not my job to help you. You want to pay me some money? Maybe then I'll help you. But I don't owe you anything. I don't owe you my time. I don't owe you my labor. And while I'm sitting here having to explain this part to you, you're still being abusive to me. So get the fuck out of my face. Like, yeah. People don't understand how much they're expecting this. They have this entitlement over Black people. And that is something that I'll just be like, I don't owe you anything. Go learn for yourself. Go follow these people who are actually willing to do this education and pay them if you are actually serious about this. Because most strangers, I will say, like people that I know, like if they're asking me a question, they genuinely want to know. But most strangers don't actually want to learn. They want to find some way of making me or making whatever Black person the bad guy so that they can feel like the good guy, or they want me to assuage their guilt and tell them that they're not a bad person, they're a good white person, that they're like an exception. Like, I'm not doing either of those things. I'm not gonna like be the villain so that you can feel better, and I'm sure as hell not going to carry your guilt. Please, you can take that back.
Sometimes it's like their truth is the truth to them, and they want you to validate that for them. I mean, dude, that's not
Yes.
my problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's yeah.
I had someone who, I had actually around that three years ago time, I had made a post that like blew up. I was like, wow. And it was about like white privilege, and someone had commented, and then she had messaged me, and she's like, oh, like, I feel so bad because of how you were treated. I'm looking at these messages like, is she for real right now? You feel bad? She's like, I'm like crying. I'm having like a spiritual awakening. I'm like, is she for real right now? Are you kidding me? And then I was like, right. So, I don't like, I didn't even like know what else to say, because I'm like, I really don't want to carry this tears and these white tears that you're throwing at me. Like, this is not my job. And that was before me being more like direct about things like that. I was just like, I'm just going to sit this out and wait for her to stop messaging me, I guess. And then she made a post on her Facebook that was like, I just took a spiritual journey through the life of a Black woman. And I was like, that's definitely not what happened in my DMs. I think you need to you need to rein it back a little bit, because you definitely don't know what it's like to be me, honey. Like, I need you to take a seat. Like, people, they just get wild. They get wild with like, it's so much. That's why like I can't do it. I'm like, I'm not doing this.
It's funny. It's funny. Watching them. Yeah, it is funny. So, it's a white-centered industry, and believe it or not, I've seen disclaimers out there that actually say that your success will vary from this, and this. And then one that stood out to me, depending on the background that you came from. I'm like, what the fuck? Way too. And then you go on ahead and turn around and tell in your marketing that absolutely anyone can do this, but your disclaimer has that. But anyway, it's a white-centered industry, and there are certain things that they miss. So what's the common thing you see that they miss when it comes to helping Black creatives and Black folks?
Oh gosh.
And how is that affecting? Like, give us a sense of the impact.
I would say there's a big gap when it comes to actually understanding what systemic oppression is. Like if someone brings up race or racism, there's a lack of understanding that racism is not someone calling you the N-word or calling you a monkey or something like that. Racism is a systemic issue. Yes, it shows up in interpersonal interactions, one-on-one, but those overt instances of like blatant, like hateful racism is like, it's like this little tip of the iceberg, and then there's like a whole rest of like a continent of racism underneath that is covert, that is subconscious, that is I'm trying to think of the word. It's something bias. I can't think of the word. But it's subconscious, and then there's systemic. And systemic is things like the school to prison pipeline, the medical racism, and the medical industrial complex. These things are systemic issues that repeatedly disenfranchise certain populations, and it varies based on like where you are. So I'm thinking specifically in the US, all of the prison industrial complex is global. So when there is a lack of understanding of the fact that this is systemic, and there are very real things that we have to contend with that are not a matter of our mentality, that are not a matter of like it doesn't even matter if you're like a rich Black person, you still have to deal with this shit. And so when there's a lack of understanding of that systemic level of racism and oppression, there's also a lack of understanding of what white coaches are doing that is harmful, and the things that they might say that are harmful. For example, law of attraction. Oh my God. Law of attraction taught by white people is like the worst shit ever. Okay. It's like, you can manifest anything. And I'm like, okay, I do believe in manifestation. I believe in energy, and like that the energy you put out brings it back. However, me as a queer, Black, disabled woman who did not come from like riches or anything, I got to put more energy out. I got to do more to overcome these systemic disadvantages that I have. That's just how it is. When we ignore those things, and you're like, oh, you just put out energy and it'll come to you. Like, it's going to be so great. It's going to be fabulous. Like, no, that's not how that works. That's not what manifesting is, guys. Like, that's not what that is. And so this law of attraction is also an erasure of how systemic issues impact us, and not only impact us in a very real life sense, but also psychologically, spiritually, and emotionally, that we are all sitting with trauma. Okay, we come from trauma. Trauma is literally in our DNA from slavery. It's actually changed our DNA. It is written in there. It got passed down. We are constantly living with that, and that gets ignored. So it's kind of a broad view because that can show up in a lot of different ways, but a lot of things about like you're playing the victim, you could just manifest it. You're being low vibe, like just be high vibe. Oh, things like, well, it just like about just being positive, like you're only allowed to have positive feelings because that's human, because human beings only have positive feelings. No, I'm allowed to be angry. My anger is righteous. My anger comes from love because of what's happened to my community. Okay, we're allowed to have anger. We're allowed to have grief. We're allowed to be sad. We're allowed to be depressed. Like these things are human. And when you don't allow yourself this full spectrum of your humanity, it is just another way of dehumanizing us. So these are some of the things that I see a lot.
I freaking hate that. The only positive thoughts here. I freaking hate that. I mean, it like you said, being human comes with a whole range of emotions, and you gotta acknowledge that. You can't just be like, oh, that's outside the positive spectrum. I gotta remove that. It's I could go on for hours.
I know. It's so frustrating. And then coupled with like the law of attraction is like, oh, well, if you keep talking about racism, you're just going to keep perpetuating racism. That's not what that means. That's not manifesting. Okay. This is called accountability. This is called bringing awareness to an issue so that it can be addressed and changed. So you think you're just going to think positive thoughts and racism is going to suddenly go away, that your unconscious bias is going to go away. That's not how that works. Like law of attraction coupled with that like relentless positivity is so harmful. It's so harmful.
Mm-hmm. There's a thing called toxic positivity.
And yes, that's what that exactly. Is. That is exactly what that is.
Yeah. So, as a black folk, right? What's a good starting point to start breaking free from the systemic oppression? What's the first few steps that they could take?
Well, systemic oppression is still here, but in terms of breaking through or challenging the ways that we've internalized it, there is, so when I run coaching programs or I work with a client one-on-one, the first thing I do is I get them feeling and breathing. And I have a yoga background, so like it comes from that. But like that was honestly being on my mat and feeling in my body and kind of getting out of my head and really tuning into the signals of my body really helped me build an awareness of some of the things that I was holding, some of the pains and traumas, some of the joys, some of the different kinds of things that were going on that I was so busy up here in my head thinking that I wasn't really tuned in deeper to myself. And so I like to get my clients feeling, because your body has been with you your whole life. Okay, so your body will pick up on things before your brain can consciously catch up. So when you are tuned into feeling, you can start to tune into like, oh, this is where I'm feeling afraid. This is where something isn't right. Something's off here. I can feel it in my body. And that's where you start to notice like, oh, I'm not saying something, or this feeling is coming up. Where did that come from? So when you come into feeling in your body and using your breath, because your breath helps like chill out your nervous system a little bit as like some of these things surface, you'll start to build that awareness. And from there, you can start inquiring into yourself, like what is the truth that I'm not saying? What am I really afraid of? When a feeling comes up in your body is like, oh, what is this? What's going on for me here? Okay, where did that come from? Where did I learn this? So it might be like, what's coming up for me here? Oh, I'm afraid. Well, okay, well, why are you afraid? Well, I'm afraid that if I say this thing that I'm going to lose friends. Okay, well, where did that come from? Where did you learn that? From X, Y, and Z experience in my past, or these things that I saw. And that's where you get to start seeing the things that you're holding on to, and also the patterns of behavior, the oppressive conditionings that you have been retaining. So what I mean is, if your response to fear, or your response to, let's say fear of like, okay, I'm going to lose these people, I'm going to push these people away. If your response to that is, I need to silence my voice, that's an oppressive pattern. That's an oppressively conditioned pattern. That is a response that you have implemented to survive, to protect yourself from losing people, to protect yourself from being rejected, to protect yourself from the fear that you're not enough or that you're not worthy of love. And it creates these patterns. And so when you build that awareness and start doing that inquiry, you can look at, oh, how have I been responding to these things? Is this really helping me? Is it not? And then you can start changing it. So it's like a broad overview of like what you can do, but like definitely feeling into your body first. And then you can start making those inquiries as to, you know, like what's going on for me here? What am I feeling? Because when you start from feeling, you're starting from that visceral, you're starting from like the limbic system. You're not starting from thinking what's going on up here in my head, or what is somebody telling me, what someone's saying. It's what do I feel? Oh, this person just said this to me and that didn't sit right with me. What's going on for me here? Or I just saw this thing on TV or like in a movie and it really irritated me, or like, or it really like lit me up and like it brought me joy. Why? What's going on for me here? You know, like, oh, I just saw like Black people enjoy, like that really lit me up. Like, who knows? It could be a broad range of feelings, but like when you get into feeling and building that awareness, it opens up so much more of your own wisdom to you and brings it to the forefront instead of just being back here somewhere, like lurking in the back of your brain, trying to like nudge you and poke you and be like, hey, pay attention to me. Pay attention to me. So that's where I would say starting. And then honestly, just like educating yourself on systemic oppression, on white supremacy and racism. I mean, even as Black people, because we internalize that and we uphold it too. We do things that perpetuate white supremacy. We do things that are anti-Black, that harm each other. And when we have a better understanding of how these systems work, then we can look at, oh shit, I'm doing this thing and this is how it's causing harm. And then we can be accountable to that and create a change. If you don't look at it, you can't change it. That's for everybody. If you don't look at what you're doing, if you don't look at the harm that you might be causing, if you don't actually pay attention to it, you cannot change it. You have to get fucking honest with yourself. And it's hard and it sucks and it's ugly. But when you do it, that's when you get to make a change for yourself, and you get to make change for all the people that you're interacting with. And you get to make a change for all of the ripple effects that goes out to beyond that, to the other people and to the community.
Wow. Yeah. And you know, it's Black folks, person of color, just understand that you're not doing anything wrong if you are perpetuating this. Understand that this is something that you weren't even conscious that you're doing. Just thought I'd sidebar to that. Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't say you're not doing anything wrong, but like, you're not like a bad person. It's like, oh my God, I'm evil because I've been perpetuating this. Like, you're not evil. You learned it. So now you get to unlearn it. Now you get to unlearn it. And it's every day. It's every day. And it doesn't stop until you die, because we have been conditioned into this from the very, very beginning.
Yeah. So now, in your personal journey, I know you said you're starting to tap into the pleasure side of things. What have you learned about that so far?
With pleasure? Oh, you know, it's interesting because I'm starting to bring it into my work now, but it's actually been a part of my journey from like the beginning of really me doing these explorations into myself, which was, I don't know, what is this, 2020? So like, I don't know, 10 years or so. Probably like 10 years ago when I really started, like, I was getting on my mat. I was like, what's going on for me? Like, I was like, really, like my whole life had just been like, you know, and I was like, okay, I need to figure out what the fuck is going on. I need to figure out like who I am. And in that, in being on my mat, in, doing those inquiries, part of that journey was also, I was doing certain programs or certain things around pleasure, around sexuality, around embodying sexuality, and using even some like tantra, like energy practices to help clear energy, and healing as well, because I have sexual trauma. I have a bit of a history of sexual trauma and a lot of sexual repression. Grew up Catholic. Religion was in there. And then there's also this fear, just like, I think me being like a Black girl being like, oh, but I have to do everything I can to be desirable because I'm a Black girl, and we're not desirable because it's not the image that you see. And it's like, you can't be a slut, you can't be a whore, you know, it's like, there's all this repression. So healing all of that, but like there were programs that I did, there were exercises that I did. And so that was part of my journey, was like, oh, let me clear this out. Let me heal this. Let me like step more into pleasure and embodying my sexuality. I'm allowed to do that. And it didn't really like sink in until last year that I was like, oh, this is like, this is part of what I need to be teaching. Like, this was a huge part of my journey. I ran a program last year for Black creatives called From Oreo to Empowered. And I ran it in like March-ish of last year. And I ran it again in the fall. And in the fall was when I added the pleasure element. I was like, I can't believe I left this out. And I was like, this was a huge part. I was thinking about, you know, like, what's my framework? Like, what are the things that I did? What was the pathway? And like, what's the process that I really want to give people? And I was like, wait, pleasure was a huge part of this. So then I started bringing that into that program. And I'm so glad that I did it, because like what we did and where I placed it was just, it was perfect, because it just, everybody that week was like, oh, I need to have this conversation with this person. Oh, I need to do this thing. Like, oh, this thing's not working for me. Because when you go in and you connect to your sense of pleasure and your right to pleasure, and that you deserve pleasure, you are less willing to settle for the bullshit. You know, you're less willing to settle. You're more like, no, I want more of this. I want more pleasure. And this thing, this dynamic, or this situation, or this job doesn't feel pleasurable to me. What shift can I make here? And like, that's what they were coming into. And I was like, good, guys, because the next week we're talking about having conscious communications and talking to people and clearing things out with other people. So it was perfectly timed. But for me, like, that was part of it, was always from the beginning. Well, maybe not the beginning, maybe it was like a couple years in, but there's always this, like, there's something here about my sexuality that is not being like fully embraced, and this kind of like struggle and this fumbling through it. A couple of years ago, I did a program called Pussy Consciousness with Kayla Hill, amazing biracial Black woman, bisexual also, Black woman who teaches, who has the Pussy Consciousness movement. And that also was like, I was like, oh my God, there's so much power in pussy.
Yeah.
You know, like it was like a 6-week, I think at that time it was a 6-week program. I'm not sure what it is now, but I mean, she's great. She is like, she's so intuitive. And part of that is because she's really connected to pussy. And like, that was a key point for me, where I was like, oh, like in making that connection, and like in helping to like heal my relationship to pussy, because there's so much negative messages around that. I really built a sense of trust in myself. Like, I did not have a good sense of trust with myself. It's like, if I felt something intuitively, I would think it to death and be like, but is that right? But I don't know. Is that right? You can't trust yourself. No, maybe it's wrong, but this could happen. And like, I would think it to death. And like, as I started to connect to pussy, I was like, no, I can trust myself, you know, and that made a huge difference for me. So there's all these kind of like different elements to it, but pleasure has been part of that journey. And now, like I said, the journey doesn't end, you know, like, I'm still in the journey. I'm still doing some healing and things like that. But I know that I can bring this in with other people and have them really experience like what happens when you really come into pleasure, when you really, like, as Black people and Black femmes in particular, is what shifts for us when we take back that control, when we take back that power over our bodies, over our pleasure, over, you know, what feels good. Oppressive systems will start breaking down. Okay, they will start breaking down, because oppressive systems are built on controlling us. And one of the ways that they control us is by controlling our bodies, by saying that we have to be of pleasure and profit to others, but we're not allowed to have pleasure ourselves, that we're not allowed to rest, that we're not allowed to be in joy. And when we say, oh no, I actually am allowed to do that, there's so much that changes. There's less control that they have. And there's more of us stepping up and saying, oh, no. This isn't going to work for me. We need to change this. We need to change this. I want to do this. This is what I'm not allowing. You're going to have to back it up. And we get more vocal about what's really going to, you know, what we really want from our lives, and actually demanding that.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Because, you know, personally, I came out 7 years ago, but I still kind of grapple with certain things when it comes to that, you know, pleasure and just like this full exploration. It's still things that I still explore, and I still have I feel kind of dirty afterwards after saying certain things. And I'm like, are you really dirty though? That's something I always ask myself. Are you really dirty though?
Are you really? And if you are, is that really a bad thing?
Yeah.
Like, let's dismantle that one.
Yeah.
Sometimes it'd be like, I want to be a little dirty.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, dirty. Well, I guess dirty's not that bad. Anyway, so what's something you wish Black creatives or Black folks asked more? What's a question that you wish they asked more?
Oh, oh, that's a good question. A question that I wish they asked more of themselves, of the world, of who.
Oh, of themselves. Let's start with that.
um,
You know, like how, yeah, question when as it relates to how can they start stepping into their power, start expressing themselves more. So when it's surrounding that, what's a question you wish they asked more?
um, I mean, I feel like even just asking like what I'm trying to think of how to phrase
Yeah.
it. Because there's so many. I just had like 5 pop in my head. Like how can I be in more pleasure? Like that's one. I think asking yourself like how can I, or like what kind of change do I want to shape?
Mm.
What kind of change do I want to shape? And the reason I phrase it like that is because so I'm a big Octavia Butler fan, phenomenal science fiction, speculative fiction writer, Black writer. She's passed. Rest in power. But she wrote these 2 books, Parable of the Sower and Parable of the Talents, which is scary predictive of what's happening right now. And they're both science fiction books. I think the first one was she wrote in 93 or was released in 93. And I think the second one was 98. And then she died before the third one, before she wrote and published the third one. But in those books, she creates kind of, I guess you can call it a religion. It's called Earthseed. And Earthseed is all about shaping change. In Earthseed, like one of the defining principles is all that you touch, you change. All that you change changes you. The only lasting truth is change. God is change. And that's the thing, because change is the only constant. It is the only thing you can rely on. It is forever and it is for all time. And so if change is the only thing that is guaranteed, then change is God. Change itself is God. And if that is the case, then like we exist to shape change. We exist to shape God. And God also shapes us. Change shapes us. And so if we are people who are exploring ourselves, who are trying to create shifts in the world, and then we need to ask ourselves, how can I shape change? You know, what can I do to shape change? And that is for yourself. Like if there's a situation that you don't like, it's like, okay, how can I shape change here? You know, where can I learn from the change that's happening? How can I shape change instead of being a victim to change? If it's something that's bigger in your community, how can I shape change here? Where can I be effective? If it's broader for the world, like my vision, like 600 years in the future is like that I have helped shape a world free of oppression. And like, I want to help Black creatives who want to help shape a world free of oppression. So you got to ask yourself that question is, how can I shape change? And that can be like I said, it can be really small, or it could be like, all right, I have this big vision later on. So what can I do to get there? And it's not all external. It is like within yourself. If it's like, hey, I have this trauma that I'm still trying to heal. Like, okay, how can I shape change? What can I do to move through that healing? And I think that can be a question. I think that's a good place, because a lot of us feel like we are at the whims of the world. We feel like we are at the whims of systemic oppression. We feel like we are at the whims of generational trauma. And we are in a way, but we're not just at the whims of the things that have happened to us. We are not just resilient because of the things we've endured. We are not just here to be strong and to endure. We are here to also thrive and to create change in the world so that our descendants can thrive and their descendants, and keep going so that we can thrive in a world that is actually shaped for us instead of a world that abuses us.
That's awesome. Kristin, I want to acknowledge you for the stand that you are for Black folks to claim their power and stand in and claim what's theirs. So I want to acknowledge you for that. And thank you. That's really all the questions I have. And thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming in here. It's been a while since we connected. I should do a better job of reaching out every once in a while.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
The best way that we could connect with you.
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram at Kristin Iris, KristinIris. Everybody spells my first name wrong. But at Kristin Iris, and then, or on my website, KristinIris.com, where you can see my different services. So I have coaching services. I also have consulting services for writers, book and script writers. And I also have a community. I have an online community for Black creatives. It is going through a little bit of a redesign right now because I'm going to be really bringing in pleasure. And so it will be focused on that. It is going to be really a community to bring together awkward Black creatives to explore pleasure as a liberatory practice and a way of unlocking creativity so that we can live in more joy, take inspired action in our creative work, and do our part to shape a world free of oppression. So you can check that out at melanatedrising.mn.co.
Awesome. Thank you. Hey, what's going on, my friends? This is Judy Vergara here. Thank you so much for checking out this week's episode of the Play Inspired podcast. Please feel free to share this episode with someone you think it could help. Don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Let us know what you think, okay? So, check out other episodes of the Play Inspired podcast. I guarantee you will love it. Have a good one.